looking at the screen. But just in terms of introductions, my name's Steve Gemma. I am the head of sales here at Sicon. For those of you who perhaps haven't heard of Sicon, we are classified by Sage as an ISV, or an independent software vendor. Essentially, we are accredited to create add-ons for Sage 200 and have been doing so for in excess of 20 years. Now, on the website, feel free to visit sicon.co.uk after today. All of these modules we only develop for Sage 200, and we sell via the Sage partner community, with Richard and the team being a long-standing partner of ours. Now, the other reason for starting on the website is if you click on the distribution, we've got the helping user guides on the right-hand side with screenshots and descriptions. But just to talk a bit of an overview of what we're going to cover in today's session. So distribution has been around in our portfolio for a number of years. And in its previous guise, it was a fairly big module, but there were certain elements, it was broken up into a number of different elements. And it meant you'd, for some customers, they only want a couple of little bits, but you'd have to buy the full thing. So what we've actually done is, based on feedback from our partner community, we've broken distribution now out into 9 individual elements. So you can pick and mix the aspects that you'd like. So what I'm going to do just to start, we'll just talk through very quickly what they are at a very high level, and then we'll get into the fun stuff, which is the showing and telling. So let me just turn my camera off, and here we go. So in terms of the main elements, and I won't do them all in order, the key ones really that a lot of customers come to first off will be around future sales and the material planning. So future sales, there's 2 sides to that. And it's looking at historical trends to give you a prediction of what you should change your minimum stock levels to those various different warehouses, and then dynamically update those. So then when you run material planning, which looks at the big picture, so any orders that you've got outstanding on the system, so where there's demand for purchasing stock, where you've got purchase orders coming in as well. But essentially, you've got a stock balance and ordering enough to keep you at or above that minimum level. Container management has certainly become an element that's sort of more and more beneficial for a lot of customers, especially since sort of Brexit as well. But it's a utility whereby a lot of the time the challenge, if you've got 1 PO per container, it's fairly straightforward. But if you have multiple PO lines on a container at the moment, trying to manage that and update the orders that might be delayed is a little difficult. So this particular module enables you to create a container, have tracking profiles, add different purchase order lines to that, and then update globally, should there be a delay. So certainly we'll cover off those ones today. We've also got reserves and call-offs. Now, this is an interesting one. This would be predominantly for those of you out there who, some people call it a blanket order, some people call it a call-off order, or sales or purchase contracts might be some of the terminology. So from the purchase side, you guarantee to, or you agree to buy 1,000 units of a product from your supplier over the next 12 months at a set price. So being able to track how much you've got left outstanding on that particular contract, or from the sales side, your customers agree to order a certain amount of items for you and you guarantee a price, and again being able to track what's remaining on that as well. Pre-allocations is another biggie. So what this does, this enables you to manage the pre-allocations, but also enable your sales team to pre-allocate purchase orders that have yet to be received, so stock items, so essentially reserving that stock before it arrives. So again, we'll cover that one off today. We've got POP management and SOP management modules. So from the sales order side, these are just some enhancements to the standard Sage sales order processing screen, things such as a nice Tele Sales button. So for those of you perhaps use the rapid order entry, but the frustration there is you don't get the granularity of information you would from a full sales order. The Tele Sales allows you to quickly add those items. Being able to copy historical order lines for items that customers bought from you, copy sales order lines, as well as superseded discontinued products. The purchase order side, some of the key elements of that would be enhanced landed costs. So again, those of you perhaps using the standard Sage landed costs will be aware that at the moment you've got a single landed nominal. As you receive the items in, the gross amount is booked in and then it credits out to Sage's landed costs. What we then do with this is you can split the landed costs in up to 6 elements, as well as some other aspects such as KPIs. And then the final two would be the warehouse replenishment and stock matrix, probably more specific. So the stock matrix was actually designed for a customer who in the clothing industry. So as you'll see in my demonstration today, I've got, for example, some shirts, so different collar sizes, different color shirts. So being able to create all those stock items easily, but also as we look to add a customer's order on, having a matrix where we can just enter the quantities and it drops those individual lines onto the order. And then finally, warehouse replenishment. So for those of you who perhaps have engineer van stock, who have consignment warehouses, so your stock held at another third party's warehouse, this utility is a way of being able to see what you need to replenish, where you're dropping below those minimum levels, and actually create that stock transfer. So anyway, that's enough talking. So hopefully there's some elements in there which will be relevant for you, and we'll just start to work through. So hopefully you can see we've got Sage 200 on screen. The whole of the distribution solution is installed in the Sage database. So it's interacting with standard Sage. So I've got every single one of our add-ons switched on. So my menu looks rather busy, but actually what we can see there are the various different elements. So I mentioned we'd start with the future sales, and there is two sides to it, but I'm going to just begin with the minimum stock. So I'm actually going to filter this for a product group. And if I click on display, what that's now doing is that's just analyzing all of the stock items in that particular product group. I mean, I could have run it for all of the stock, but just for speed today. And it's looking at each of the stock items. If it's got multiple warehouse locations, you're going to see it listed in here multiple times. And it's just analyzing. If we look at the columns at the moment, it's looking at the last rolling 13 weeks monthly average. And it's based on usage, and I'll explain that a little bit more. For those of you who have seasonal trends, you can enter a date range here. So rather than look at just the last rolling 13 weeks, it would look at the historical range there. What do I mean by this? If I was starting to look to order for the summer now, I could put in the 1st of July to the 30th of September 2020, and it's going to analyze our usage during that period. So now it's displayed all that information, and ideally we're looking for the big swings. So for example, we've got current minimum stock level of 100, and actually if we look, we've not had any usage for that particular item for the last 2 years. So the system's suggesting we change that minimum stock level to 0, so essentially we buy to order. If we don't, and we run MRP, and perhaps we get that one order where a customer wants to buy 10, well actually when we run this, because we haven't got enough stock, even regardless of somebody not wanting to buy, because it's going to try to keep you back to or above that minimum level, it's going to suggest that we buy some of, I think that's our crackers in this example here. So let's change it to 0. If I switch it the other way, we can see, for example, let's go for this one here. We've had a bit of an increase in terms of the sales or the usage of our espresso cups, and the system's suggesting we amend the minimum level from 0 to 371. Now, I'll talk about how it's worked out the calculation in a moment, but what we can also do is click on the blue hyperlink, and this is going to bring up Sage's monthly trading figures, but we've enhanced that. So for the sales analysis, we give you a graphical representation, so we can start to look at the phasing of that. Lost orders, I'll touch on. That's an element of stock management, so enabling your sales team to be able to record lost orders as they're tracking them, and you can choose which ones would then be included in this minimum calculation in order to ensure that we've got coverage in future. But the key one is usage, as I say, and usage is anything. So where you've dispatched sales orders, it might be where you've done internal issues. For those of you manufacturing, that would be where you're consuming it in a bill of materials, for example. Now, with the rolling 13 weeks, that's great. I can see there's a bit of phasing, but this is why if I click on the last 2 years, I can then start to have a look and see, okay, actually, we do have those regular hockey sticks. So that does match that particular trend. But the most important thing here, in my opinion, is we're not automatically updating. There is no substitute. I've spent 3 years forecasting revenues for a FTSE 100 company many years ago. And the thing I learned there was the data is great for being able to analyze, but there's no substitute for experience and that kind of human aspect. So how it's worked the calculation out is as follows. So the demand is usage plus lost orders if you've purchased the stock management piece and people are recording that, and that gives us our average demand for the month at the moment in that 3-month period or the date range. In the background of the system, I've set 21 working days in the month, gives us our average daily demand. The lead time from the preferred supplier is 5 days, gives us a safety margin that I've set in the background of 50%. So we're going to have a coverage of 7.5 days. And with all of that in mind, that's the minimum stock level that we should have in order to ensure that based on those analytics, we don't run out of stock. We can override that on the stock item or the supplier as well. So if you've got suppliers that are perhaps less reliable, you might want to increase that to, let's have 2 times the coverage. Whereas if they're more reliable, you might change that to 1.1. So let's have 10% extra. The final bit at the bottom is just having a quick look at your stock item balances. And again, we've enhanced Sage's balances screen here. So being able to give visibility of what's been allocated, what's on purchase orders that are yet to come in, even down to forward orders, so sales orders that we're yet to add or allocate stock. So what you would do, those that you want to update, you simply tick, or you could select all and you update. And what that's going to do is then amend the minimum stock level on the warehouses for all of those stock items. So that's the first part. The second part then is actually looking forwards. So within the material planning, which we'll come on to next, so which is another one of the elements there, you can add a manual forecast. So this would be where, so what the system's going to do is it's going to analyze the data that you've already got on there. So the minimum stock level, the lead time from your preferred supplier, any sales orders that are consuming stock, purchase orders that are going to increase stock that have yet to be received in. But for those of you who have your business development team perhaps speaking to your customers and they're giving you a forecast, but you've yet to receive the orders, you can manually add in a forecast, and material planning will include that. You can link it to a customer if you wish, but the date that you require it, what the stock item is, the quantity in the warehouse, and again, it will include that in, but you can import that via our template. It's just a 5-column CSV, so you can manage that in a spreadsheet and then import that in, and material planning is going to look at that. If, as I put on a sales order for an item that is in that forecast, as I save the line, it will also ask me, do I want to reduce the balance by the sales order that I've put on? So there's a bit of dynamic aspects. But if I come back into the sales order forecast, what this enables you to do is we can say, so over the last 12-month period, and I'll pick my espresso machine here. If I click on display, for each of the warehouses, it's showing me the sales over the last 12 months because that's the period I've picked. If I just select one of those and I click on generate forecasts, what we can do is we can say, let's increase that, and it's going to tell us based on that forecast change, what potentially the sales might be based on last year. As you generate that, what it does is it then just simply drops that, or drops all those elements into this forecast. So it gives you another way of working. In my experience, a lot of customers will still manage it outside of the system and the spreadsheets and import it in, but that's a new utility that we added in the last release. So from a material planning perspective, just to save time, I ran this earlier in good old Blue Peter fashion. So I'll talk through what it's done at the moment. I've got about 6,500 stock items, and you can see there it took just under 2 minutes to run. Now we have tried to optimize it. It does depend on the speed of your server. Obviously the volume of stock items, if you've got 300,000, that's going to take longer than somebody who's got 3. But again, you get the idea. You don't have to kick anybody out of Sage. You can run this as many times as you want. But what it will do every time you run it, it will delete the previous suggestion. And then it's worked through all of the stock items and analysing what we call the future stock movements, and I'll come on to that in just a moment. And what it's going to then bring back is all of that analysis. And the first one will be warnings. Now, because it's demonstration data, I've got a lot of data in the past, but we can see things such as purchase orders that may be overdue. So the purchase order is due in yesterday. It's not been received, or we've had no update from the office admin perspective. It's just going to tell us that that's been overdue. or suggested purchase orders. So he's going to generate suggestions, might not arrive in time for, now I've got manufacturing switched on, so for works orders, but may not arrive in time for certain sales orders. And if you double click, what that's going to do is that's going to open the future stock movements, and you can see the orders that it's going to affect. I will touch on that a bit more. We've also got reschedule messages. We've kept it very simple, but if the demand changes, you might get a message to say that you could reschedule a purchase order. As we come over to these three tabs here, depending on the fulfillment method on your sales order, we will split the suggestions out. So for example, those where it's coming in from stock would appear on this list. Those where you've set the fulfillment to be direct from the supplier, the purchase order suggestions would appear here, and then supplier via stock in this particular one as well. And what we're doing is we're presenting this information to you so you can make those relevant decisions. So the first column is going to be the date that we need to place or create the PO. And depending on how far out you've got orders and forecasts, you will see dates out into the future. Now you could place them now, it's entirely up to you, but it's giving you a suggestion based on the lead time from your preferred supplier of when you should generate that order. And we can see here the 15th, 10-day lead time, so we should have that in based on working days by the 29th. Again, you can change the date should you wish. And actually in the options, and there's loads of different options, I've grouped so anything where the suggestion, so a suggestion would be a sales order, for example, are within a week, just group it into one individual line. I've got some of the stock item details, the quantity the system's suggesting, and I can overwrite that. Again, I've got some choices there. Units of measure and which of our warehouses it's going to look to buy it into. Our current stock levels, our preferred supplier, but from the drop-down list, these two are suppliers set up on that particular stock record, but we do list the rest of your purchase ledger. As I always say in these demonstrations, I wouldn't not suggesting you can nip round to your local store to buy items, but if it's an emergency and you need to get them in and it's a supplier you wouldn't normally use, it means you can select them from your purchase ledger and generate a PO. There's the unit price, and again we try to use some logic, but I can override that, so you could group it by supplier and speak to them. But if you've got list prices, that's what we're going to pull through from the preferred supplier. If you haven't, then we'll try to use a live price from an open PO. I don't know if I've got one of those. Yes, I have. So the most recent PO that's still open, because that should be the most recent price. If not, your last buying price, and as a last resort, your average. And then finally, if we have a quick look on the end here, we've then got some of the reasons why. So I'll give it a couple of examples. Let's just double click on a couple of these. So the example here is we've got a minimum stock level of 5. We've got a usual order quantity. Now I've obviously got something switched off because it's suggesting we, oh no, there you go. I know exactly why, because we've got a usual order quantity of 30. So our opening balance is 20, and the system's quite happy with that because it's above the minimum. And we're only using free stock. So you might have more than that in stock, but because you've allocated it, we ignore it. You've already ring fenced it, you know that you're using that stock. I've got a works order because I've got manufacturing that's going to consume some stock and bring it back to 12. I've also got another one of our modules consuming those. So the trigger point here is it would bring us down to a balance of 4. 4 below is below 5. And we've got to order in multiples of 30. 34 is above our minimum level and the system's happy. Double click perhaps on another example here. What have we got down the bottom here? So minimum stock level of 5. We can order in eaches. Again, the balance is going down. We've got a purchase order. That's going to bring the balance up. But the suggestion is ordering 6 because that's going to bring us back to 5. Now, the actual suggestion would be somewhere up here. It's because, as I say, it's demonstration data. A lot of my items are in the past. And actually, if you ran a business this way, you wouldn't last long. So please don't judge me on that. But hopefully you get an idea of how it's calculating. Now, if some of that's a load of rubbish, and providing you've got access to be able to amend stock items, rather than write it on a piece of paper and have to go away, what we can do is make some changes, perhaps to the minimum level or to the suppliers from within this list. Again, we also give you your stock item balances with those drill downs, stock at other locations, and the monthly trading figures as well. So you look through this, decide what you want to place. You can filter and just say, show me those that's where we need to create them this week or today. And you can select or select all, and those that you select, You then click on this Create Purchase Orders button. It will then group them where they're from the same supplier for the same delivery address. If I was to select all and click on Create, that will then generate me a purchase order or the appropriate number of purchase orders into purchase order processing, so I can then go and place those. And because those purchase orders are now in this future stock movements, when we rerun it, if we get some extra orders, it's going to take into consideration the balance that's coming in. There's one other alternative. Now, you do have to filter it by a single supplier. And if I just select all there, and this was added in the October release. If we click on this button, what it does is it creates us a suggested purchase order. And the idea behind this is for those customers who, especially with Brexit, you want to maximize the order that you're placing. So these are all the items the system's suggesting. If we click on add new lines, we can also add other stock items just to fill out the particular purchase order. Alternatively, if you purchase the POP management module within the distribution piece and you utilize the quantity breaks within there, if I click down onto the highlighted, it will show you if there are any quantity breaks, and we can then increase the quantity we're going to order and get a lower per unit cost as well. So that's the material planning aspect as well as the future stock movements. So if we move now onto the container management side, and there's two aspects to the container management. For those of you who will only ever place one PO per container, for example, or one PO for an order perhaps to China, we've got some tracking profiles on the PO, which I'll show you momentarily. But also for those of you, as I mentioned earlier, who will split multiple purchase orders across a container, again, we can handle that. So the first bit you're going to do will be to create your container size. So we've got a 20-foot container and you can set the maximum payload and volume. Now, it's not an exact science, but if I come into our stock control module, I just filter my list, what you'll also find is we've made a tweak to the standard Sage stock module. And you'll have a distribution option in the Sicon folder. So I'll come back to these and talk about those a bit later. This is where we can override for the future sales I mentioned. Down at the bottom here, we can use container management, and you can, if you want to, set up your lengths and widths, work out a volume and a weight. Now, I did mention it's not an exact science because, of course, we're not going to take into consideration how it's packed, but what it can do is you load a container, tell you at what point you're going to exceed the weight and the volume based on the logic we've got in the system. So with that created, the next aspect will be to create your tracking profiles. So we've got PO tracking profiles and containers as well. Essentially, there's up to 8 steps. So for example, for the PO, we've said 1 day for them to process it, 5 days to manufacture, it's on the sea for 15, and so on. So it's a 27-day lead time. For the containers, you can have multiple different profiles. Are they working days? So you create those. If it's just a purchase order, once you've generated and created your purchase orders, whether that's manually or using the material planning, and we go into a PO, what you'll have is you'll have the tracking dates tab here, and you can load up your tracking profile, the one that's appropriate, the date that you're going to place it, and it will then give you your anticipated delivery date based on the date. So if I just move that and say, okay, we're going to place that today, and I just tab through, the 12th of May is when it can be delivered. And what this enables you to do is, if, for example, it took them slightly longer to manufacture, you can change the dates here. So that might be the 22nd, and that's going to have an impact on this date. And as I save, it's going to pop up, or I could just update the PO lines, and that's going to update those lines. If we have also purchased material planning, we rerun it, you're going to see the impacts. You might get some warnings to say that that purchase order may not arrive in time because there's been a delay. You can also confirm the stages, and you can record any notes or any problems. So again, you've got that historical trend. So that's on the individual PO. Where it's a container, slightly different approach. So what you'll do is you'll come into the container management list, you click on your new container, good old Blue Peter fashion again, there's one I prepared earlier. So that's the internal container number. When you get the actual vessel number, you can record it in here. And to add lines to this, you can pick a supplier, and then you can just start to add those lines, or you can pick certain purchase orders and you can just say, okay, yeah, let's add those lines to the container, and they've now been added. And as the volume, you can see the weight there, and it will turn red when you get to it, and it's going to exceed it. We also show you the values, so you can work out roughly for your insurance what you need to insure that container for. From your tracking profiles, we can pick our profile, and again, it's the same principle here, but this time when there's a change and it's going to be a delay, when we update the purchase order lines, that's going to update the individual lines for those items against the relevant purchase orders, saving you a huge amount of time and manual input. And again, running material planning is going to take all that into consideration. We have an attachments tab for any documents that you can store centrally, and there's your vessel and your forwarder details as well as analysis codes if you want to be able to report further. And that's, as I mentioned earlier, is becoming more and more popular in terms of a module, especially since the turn of the year. Okay, now I mentioned reserves and call-offs. Now, one thing that some customers will do is they will, especially on the purchase side, where there's a blanket purchase order, they'll put the purchase order on the system, and then goods receive or phone at the supplier as they need it. If you were using material planning, that's no good, because what the system will do is it will just see that you've got purchase orders on there, you've got enough of a balance. You might get a warning that it's not going to arrive in time, but it's not really helping you to manage. So that's where a purchase contract comes in. So material planning is not going to look at these purchase contracts, but as I said earlier, it's a way of being able to manage what's left on them. So for example, I've got one here for my coffee supplies that I created. And what we're saying is that's the supplier, and that's the reference we've got. That's the date range that we're going to be purchasing or agreeing this contract. And we've agreed to buy these particular items and the quantities, and those are the prices that we've agreed to buy. We can see the balance remaining on both of those, so we haven't yet placed any purchase orders within that period, but you can see what orders you've got, what you've received, and then what you've invoiced. So it's just a way of being able to track that, as well as print off a contract. That should have gone into my spooler, and generate a purchase contract as well. So it's just a nice way of being able to manage that. If I look at the other side of it, which would be a sales contract. So what have we got here? Let's go for my, sorry, I'll have a look at the Asda contract. So that's running from till the end of June. We've agreed to buy these kettles from them. Oh, sorry, they've agreed to buy the kettles from us, sorry, actually. A quantity of 50 at a unit price of £100 per kettle. And we can see that they've already ordered 50, we've dispatched 10, and we've invoiced 10 as well. If I just have a quick look at one of these other ones, let's have a look at the quality counts one. Quantity of 100 espresso machines, again for this particular year, and we can see the balances. Now, just to give you an example, as I go to put on a sales order for quality counts, standard Sage sales order, and where are they? They should be in here. There they go. So there's quality counts. Ignore this pop-up, and the next one I will talk about those in just a moment. But as I add the items on, I think it was my kettle, wasn't it? So ignore that's our enhancement pack. So the customer wants 10 of those, and I'm going to say just a price of £50, something like that. But as I save the line, if I've picked the right stock item, which I haven't, but it would pop up and say there's a price for them, and they're still in the contract, and you could amend that particular contract. Should have written that down. So that again is just a way of being able to track. Might not be relevant for yourselves, and that's why we split the module down. So if we move on to stock management, so the first bit I mentioned, there's a number of utilities. So if we come back into our sales order, and we'll pick King Stanton will do. This pop-up is one of the elements you'll get within the stock management. And the idea here is, now as a salesperson, I can only talk about myself. I'm not going to for 1 minute suggest that any salespeople who work for yourselves or that you know are in the same category as this. But if you dangle the carrot of a sale, sometimes the admin goes out the window, so to speak. So rather than get the order on, and we often hear the wrong delivery address being put on the order, and you know, it's hidden, there it is in the tab there, and you just forget to go through and amend it. So we bring that information to the forefront. So I could either add in a new address, obviously we're using the invoicing address, or I could pick the appropriate address. Are there any specific notes that I need to be made aware of, as well as filling in the analysis code? We also then pop up any undispatched sales orders for this particular customer. So do we need to or could I tag it to the back of that sales order, or the customer wants to know the status of any orders, and we can then write down the number and say, okay, we're going to have a look at that afterwards. Now, if I come in and add the items traditionally, so we'll put on our espresso machine. This superseded item is another aspect of stock management. So being able to flag against certain stock items that it's now been superseded. It's going to pop up. It's going to allow me to say no. So if we've got some stock, we can do that. But then you could flag as discontinued once you've run out of stock. I'm going to say no to this. Now I'm going to add 10 on there with the price. All of that's the same. But if I just expand this particular screen, you're going to get some extra buttons. So I mentioned the lost orders earlier. So within here, you can set up different reasons, and you can, again, so for no stock and lead time too long, you can flag when you create them, do you want them to be included in the minimum stock calculation? But of course, capturing lost orders because we were too expensive might be important as well. Now, I don't have to save the line. I can just enter the information save, and it's going to store that in our tables, and I'll show you those shortly. You also get this distribution button. So, for example, customer says £299.60. I never paid that last time I bought them. Okay, well, let's have a look at your previous sales orders, and I can see you bought some on the 1st of April, and yes, you did. Now, obviously, you wouldn't articulate yourself quite that way over the phone. That's probably not such good customer service, but again, it's giving you the history of what sales orders for that particular item and when they bought them. We can see the balances, so perhaps we haven't got stock. Have we got stock at any of our other warehouses? So in terms of free stock that we could dispatch you from, as well as the stock movements. So we haven't got stock, and one option would be, have we got any purchase orders already on the system? So we'll load up this future stock movements. Have we got any purchase orders that have been confirmed? Yes, we have. We can see that's coming in, or if not, the earliest we can get it in would be the 6th of May. So again, just providing all of that information to your sales team while they're on the phone. The final bit is if you went down the pre-allocations route, you'll get this pre-allocations button. So we haven't got any stock. If you've got that module as well, I appreciate I'm merging the modules, but hopefully it will make sense in a moment. I can actually see what purchase orders we've got out there that we've yet to receive and the free stock. So as you pre-allocate to that purchase order, the free stock on that PO, even though you've not yet received it, goes down. So I haven't got enough on one order, but those two are close enough. So I could pre-allocate 5 for that purchase order and 5 for this one. So a couple of benefits here. The first one is we're ring fencing that stock. So when the purchase order arrives and we're good to receive and we book that stock in, it will automatically allocate to the appropriate customers or customer orders. And that means, obviously, providing people don't change the allocations, etc., that we can say to the customer, yes, you know, we can ring fence some stock for you. That's going to arrive in on Friday. We should be able to get you that for next Tuesday or Wednesday. Back to the stock management piece, you've also then got these additional buttons. So as I mentioned before, copy lines. So these are previous sales orders for this particular customer. Just being able to go through and rather than have to copy a whole order, just be able to tick the lines and add them to this particular order and just go through the various different ones and just build up the order that way. And again, you've got your distribution for your balances and your lost orders at that stage. Add historical lines would be anything that this person's bought from us. So there you go. They bought the espresso machines. When did they last buy it? Any superseded items, the quantity they bought, and the prices as well. So again, being able to add those lines on there. Big one though is the Tele Sales. So for those out there who know, the salespeople know the stock item code, so they can very quickly start to just add the lines in. So what free stock have we got? The customer would like 5 of those. Pull through obviously buying prices, but no, we'll put £110. Are there any discounts? Keep adding your lines, and then you simply add them to the sales order. And then finally, you can create templates. So these aren't dynamic. They're not linked to specific stock items, but it might just be, as I created one here, any Black Friday specials. So these items, you're interested in, it's up to 25% off, and we can add those. Or it might be items that complement a certain thing, so you can create these templates. Just whilst I'm in here, we mentioned the matrix side. That particular module, if you are using that, once you've got it set up, you can pick your stock item group. So it might be formal dress shirts. And what we've got there is the collar size across the top and the length, the sleeve length. If I pick my, so let's clear that. Let's pick, I'll come out of that. Let's try that again. Let's pick one of the others, my polo shirt. That's got color this time, how I set it up in the size. And you just simply enter in and go, oh, the customer would like 5 of those, 2 of those, 7 of those, add to the sales order. And there they've dropped them in. Now, of course, if I've got sales prices on there set up, they've pulled them through. Just the way, especially if you've got those different, perhaps it's clothing or that sort of thing, that's a great utility. Now, coming back into the stock management, so those are the tools that are on the sales order, but there is actually more to it as well. If we come into the stock management piece, there's this particular option here, which if it's not too sad to have a favorite element of a module, this would be mine. So as I click on display, this is now going to list me all of the sales order lines by line level where we need to allocate stock. But it's also going to list me all of those sales order lines where we've allocated stock, but we're yet to dispatch. So a couple of benefits for this. We've got a number of customers who at the moment turn off Sage's auto allocate, and that they're managing it in spreadsheets and then going into the individual orders and updating them. We've got some do it that way because there's no concept of pre-allocations, and actually you can use the pre-allocations and they might switch on auto allocate. But if you still want to manually handle allocations, in this particular screen, if we keep an eye just on that free value there, 29, as I go through and allocate the one, we can see the balance of free stock goes down. So it's a way of either manually working down the list, or you can auto allocate, so select all and allocate and do the allocation process. So that's benefit number 1, obviously more visible and far easier to use. The way that I like to think of this though is, whilst all customers are equal, there might be some customers for a number of you who, if they happen to phone up, you might just perhaps try to fulfill their order a little bit quicker than others, just because perhaps they're nicer to you. In that instance, perhaps we haven't got enough stock. We can see their orders in here. Okay, so what orders have we got on the system that we could unallocate stock and still get some stock in on time? So actually we could unallocate the 10 from King Standing Kitchens there. So I can quickly click on that and unallocate, and then I can allocate it to the appropriate lines. So again, it's a nice utility to be able to manage all of that. The lost orders inquiry that we spoke about earlier, as we record those, that gets dropped into this list here. We can just authorize and clear them out there. They are stored in the tables, but it's just a way of being able to manage them and just check which user and what the details were. We do have for sales price user permissions. So are we going to allow them to create price books or amend? So just for your sales team. And then we've also created you a list view, but again, this time by sales order line. So using that alongside Sage is just to be able to see the line level detail, the promise date and the quantities on there, be able to amend and view. So that's the SOP management. We did touch on, whilst we were in there, the stock matrix. So to create the matrix, sounds like something of a sci-fi movie. So in the settings, you create your various different attributes. So for example, size, color, collar size, etc. So you create all of those matrix groups. And then you create a brand new group. And all I did was, when I did this, what attributes do I want to include? You've got your X and Y, and then you can have further formats in there should you wish, just to add some additional levels. And you would generate your stock codes. But before you do that, what product group do you want to create them in? What locations do you want to add against them? Your different suppliers, which one's going to be your preferred supplier? Again, all those different elements. And you can then just generate your stock codes. That creates them in the stock module, as well as then creating the group, so you can do what I did on the sales order earlier. Okay, just a couple of other aspects just before we finish off. The pre-allocations. So to be able to manage those pre-allocations, if I quickly just search in here, we can see all of those pre-allocations in the list. We can filter and say what type am I looking for. So sales order lines. So where we've, if I just filter that down, where we've pre-allocated to a sales order. Now, a lot of mine, again, because I've got manufacturing, I've got them in, but you'd be able to see, and you could edit, create brand new ones. You could delete them as well, should you wish. Pot management. So only just a couple more to go. A couple of the key bits in this one would be things such as supplier KPIs. Now, it's a very simple thing, the way that we've done this. And actually, I was talking to Darren from EBS around this. What we find with a lot of customers is that this is great. This is just what they need to know. Once you create KPIs, we can then just start to see, based on the color coding, who are our best suppliers and who are our worst, and just based on percentages that they're on time, and you set your own colors up. But actually, you might want more metrics than that, and that's really where creating a bespoke report, whether it's Power BI dashboards, whether it's Excel, again, speak with the guys at EBS who would then, because it will in the same single database, that's something where they can start to look to develop that based on the logic. But this is nice just out of the box if you just want something quite simplistic. We've also got, this is an interesting one, supplier catalog. So we actually developed this for a customer who they don't deal with stock, but so that everything's free text, but they wanted a bit of consistency around the free text. So being able to create a catalog of stock items, but they're actually just our stock items. They're not real stock items, if that makes sense. So being able to manage that with buying prices as well, right the way through to, we mentioned earlier, the supplier quantity breaks as well. But the major aspect really in the pot management, other than some of the list views and being able to change locations, stock inspections, actually, that's quite a nice one. So for certain stock items, being able to flag that they require to be inspected and pass or fail those inspections for the stock that you've received in, is around. But the final bit, and the one that most customers would use this for, is the landed costs. And this I mentioned earlier is where you can break this down into up to 6 types and then set your landed costs. You can import those, so you set them up against your stock items, and then on your purchase order, you'll end up with, if I just come back into that one, you'll have a landed cost tab. If there are any landed costs, they would appear here with the provisional. You can put in what you actually think it's going to be. You can apportion that across the various different stock items, and that could be percentage or actual cost. As we book the gross in, credits out to Sages, and then credits and debits then into our nominals as well. So it's just a nicer way of being able to be more granular with those landed costs. And then the final one is the warehouse replenishment. So as I mentioned earlier, this is great if you've got van stock. So perhaps you're in the service industry and your engineers have got van stocks. So setting minimum minimum levels against those vans, or where it's consignment stock, so you need to replenish. It could even be shops, replenishment into different shops. So you pick your source, so that would be your main warehouse. Look at our factory. That it's going to show us where there's mutual stock items. In this instance, actually we've got enough stock, so I don't need to worry about that. But what it will do is it will show you where they're dropping below the minimum, or the free stock drops below. It will then show you in here the quantity that you can transfer, providing you've got enough stock here in order to be able to fulfill that request. So as you add, I can manually add in some quantities here, so you can see that in there. If I click on create transfer, what that does is that drops that into this particular screen here, where you've got your transfer list. You can allocate stock, so that ring fences it. Print your picking list. You can mark it as dispatched. It moves the stock then into in transit, so it's still there. When it gets to the other side and you receive, or you get notice that it's been received, you can then receive it into the other warehouse. You can also use this just to manually create them. So I'm conscious of time. That's sort of my 45 minutes up. There's lots more I could keep talking about, but I guess, Richard, if we turn the cameras back on, just to see if there's any questions.
Yeah, thanks ever so much, Steve. If anybody has got any questions, feel free to write them into the chat now. Alternatively, you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you, and you can ask them. Ask the questions to everybody.
Perfect. Well, just whilst waiting to see if there are any questions. I mean, in my opinion, Richard, as you all know, this module's been in the portfolio for a number of years, and I know you were one of the people who joined the debate when we were talking about what should we do with it, splitting it up. And I think it's fair to say it's made. Well, it might have made the choice harder, or kind of go which elements you want to need, but it does make it easier for the customer to say, actually, I just want that element, as opposed to buying a large module, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, historically, and I know I've fed this back to you, the name doesn't necessarily sell the product and how good it is. And I think what you've done more recently in terms of breaking the product up into sort of more bite-sized chunks and giving people the flexibility to mix and match those modules to their exact requirements, it really sort of brings that product out to everybody now. Just to be able to sort of select which parts they need and add it into the system. And it's certainly what we've seen as a growth area with a number of customers at the moment. But I mean, it certainly seems that you've done a good job on the demo anyway, because we haven't had any questions come in.
Well, I never know whether that's I've done a good job, or people are like, what on earth has he been talking about for the last 45 minutes? The one thing I probably should have covered off as well is, obviously we're talking about these modules in the guise of distribution, but I think, as with a lot of the other Sicon add-ons as well, for those customers perhaps who are using some of the other Sicon elements, for example, barcoding, actually the warehouse replenishment, you might have seen some bits, that's quite a nice complement with the replenishment to create the transfer which comes out to the handout. Or for those customers who in the manufacturing space but want to manage the pre-allocations a little better, that then ties in quite nicely. The material planning here, for those of you who have already got Sicon Works orders and the MRP, it's the same MRP, just a cut down version, so it's slightly cheaper. You would need the full MRP for that, but again, the future sales, so that's historical trends piece that we came in, that would interact. So what's nice is it's about picking the right bits for the customer specific projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just giving the access to those from the screens that you're in at the time, from that sales order processing, that sort of tele sales entry, and then being able to click and view everything from that screen, it just really helps and really sort of saves time from jumping around from screen to screen.
Yeah, I mean, even down to, I did a demonstration last week, I think it was, and just something as simple as discontinued and superseded products. Got to the stock item and said, look, these are where some of the settings were. And that, just being able to discontinue a product, was quite a key pivotal sort of requirement, just to say, so please don't, no longer, we don't want that appearing for the salespeople as opposed to having to archive the stock record, or yeah, just the supersede. So again, it's one of those, you kind of look at it and go, what are the big wins? But sometimes, and this is where, you know, it is very much customer specific. It comes down to those individual parts and I suppose what the pain points are. And there's a lot in here. I think it's overtaking our enhancement pack in terms of probably the value of the different elements, which you can make use of.
Absolutely. I hope you weren't trying to say that salespeople are always trying to sell the one product that there's not available or not on the shelf. But,
Richard, I would never say anything like that, Matthew.
But no, absolutely. You know, discontinuing a product or even lost reasons. You know, it's one of those things that, you know, salespeople always go, oh, we've not got this. You know, and there's always these people, you know, certain customers ringing up and asking for that particular product. Whereas just being able to capture those lost reasons, report on that on a monthly basis to see what the truth is behind that. I think it's real, you know, good little add-on.
And I think the visibility of that, dropping it into that screen where you can say yes, you know, I'll kind of authorize, I'm happy with those, you know, to use the data. I think that's important because I remember a company I worked at previously, somebody got very excited because, well, another area of the business, customers were leaving, but it was all the reasons were something which for our business unit was the bread and butter. So they said, can you look into it? And to cut a very long story short, it was the first option on the why does the customer want to leave in the list view. So we got all of this, there's, you know, 500 customers we can go after. Actually, it wasn't. So had that been captured a bit earlier, just to see everybody's picking the same ones, you could have then intercepted that and got them to put something that's a bit more valid.
Yeah, definitely. Brilliant. Well, I was going to say there doesn't seem to be any questions. Obviously, you know, time to digest these kind of things. So if there's, you know, if you have a question that you want to ask, then, you know, feel free to pass it over to either myself or Darren at EBS, and we'll either answer it or, you know, ask you, Steve, and see if you can answer the question for us.
No, definitely. And likewise, Richard, we're more than happy to, you know, appreciate on these, we've whipped through quite a lot very quickly at a high level. If anybody thinks there's some elements in there which would be of interest and they want a one-to-one demonstration, again, just let yourself or Darren know. We can get something in the diary and kind of step through at a slightly slower pace.
Brilliant stuff. Right, well,
Perfect.
Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, Steve. And yeah, we'll obviously try and do some more of these webinars moving forward, just on the whole range of Sicon products. So we'll send out some emails with some future dates moving forward.
That's great. Thanks very much.
Thanks ever so much.
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.